It was just a cultural revolution. You had the sexual revolution. You took prayer and Bible reading out of the schools. And when you did that, then there was no moral compass for high school kids anymore. Everything was what you feel. And so, and the first no-fault divorce law was in 1970. So divorces went from 300,000 a year to over 1 million in 10 years. Wow. And you had all kinds of things that happened that really messed kids up. Drugs came into huge. I didn't know anybody, when I was growing up, I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody in my high school whose parents were divorced.
Yeah, that's so amazing for even like for me to consider. And I was growing up in the 80s, so 20 years difference, and divorce was very prevalent, and drugs. Yeah. And you're talking about a time before divorce was common. Oh, yeah. Families stayed together. Mm-hmm. No drugs in the community that you could have access to, even though they must have been around somewhere.
Yes.
But extremely rare. Right. And they were actually praying and talking about the Bible in school, as a common occurrence. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And by the time that I'm the age that you're describing, mm-hmm. none of that is true. Right. Right. So things were starting to change very quickly, mm-hmm. and that was that you're seeing the impact on families.
Oh, huge.
Dealing with kids.
Huge.
So some of the things that you've seen, over the years, like that families get into, like what would you say you just became accustomed to seeing and working with kids?
Even the whole culture, even like the rise of anti-heroes. I grew up when there were times, we had real heroes like John Wayne, or Howard Hill was a great archer. He was my hero. So in the olden days, the great movies always had the good guy with the white hat, and he there was a great movie of John Wayne where he said, that your word is your bond. You never break your word. Well, that all changed in the 60s because the heroes were a blurring of good and bad. So with Clint Eastwood, he was a bounty hunter. And so he was the hero of the show, but he was a bounty hunter who killed for money. So we have a tremendous loss of the true hero that came up. And even today, you have John Wick. He's a bounty hunter. Yeah. You have people like Rambo. So with that loss of true hero, especially for boys, it was a tremendous change in the whole culture.
Well, that sort of hits me as you say that. Like, we went from John Wayne to John Wick.
Yeah.
And in between, honestly, like if I looked back, just being a kid from the 80s, to Clint Eastwood, he would seem like a very pure character versus something like of a John Wick character that we have today. Mm-hmm. So symbolically, the culture has gone so far.
Oh, yes.
And now, these kids growing up here in the modern world with those types of anti-heroes just get something completely different.
Lying is epidemic today. We have a tremendous, we have politicians that lie like it's nothing, or their personal, their personal life has nothing to do with their office. Well, that's crazy. Character is everything. And so, but young people don't have those true heroes to look to that had impeccable character, that their word meant everything to them. And so without those heroes to emulate, R.C. Sproul said that's why we have heroes, to emulate, to look up to model. Yeah. And without those, and when you have 18 million kids going to bed without fathers in their home today, that's catastrophic. That's a terrible thing.
Yeah, so now the same thing that your dad was up against, mm-hmm. People are doing that now with the anti-hero, without fathers in the home. And, I would imagine that, people going to church too, to talk about things as a pastor. People don't have that kind of support that your dad did to turn things around.
That's right.
Nothing that they could model that would give them some kind of example to go forward on.
That's right.
Yeah, so I would imagine that you were very passionate about seeing these things as somebody who's working with kids, and you're going in the ministry. And one of the things that I talk about with kids nowadays is that we used to have a lot of like very bright people going in the ministry, like the best of our groups would be chosen for ministry. And now I don't know if people consider that, but I still say it to kids like, hey, if you're really smart in school and you got a great future, you should consider that there's a home for you, a job for you to do in ministry, and you'd have work to do for the rest of your life. And you look back at that at the end and know that you did the right thing, that you served the community in a way that you couldn't do otherwise. And to consider that that's why God gave you all of these things. And sometimes I even have pastors discouraging me, well, you don't want to, but I truly believe, one of the best career decisions that you could do even now would be to choose the ministry.
It was really not something that I fancied myself doing because of that I was like, I'm not sure I want to do that. Yep. But it just evolved over time because I really enjoyed doing the youth work. I thought I was pretty good at it, and I could see kids' lives changed. And I had that model, that guy that he was a football player and that Keith Brown, and yet he was a incredible pastor, loving, caring guy, funny, just tremendous guy. Yeah. And so it evolved into where I just got a little more mature, and I started working with the parents and doing speaking and things like that, working with the dads. I knew I had to work with dads, I had to work with families, and so I got to love it, really.
Yeah, and I share that with you. They found out I was a counselor like early on in our marriage. As 20-something, and they were like, you're a counselor, you should be in student ministry. They called it you need to run our youth group. Back then, that's what they would say, you're a youth ministry. And I found, and we were we were employed with the church for 7 years, part-time, as I was being a counselor. My wife and I would do that, and just found that was the greatest thing. I probably prayed in public with people for the first time, a group of kids. Learned, very keenly what God's word was, as I had to prepare for Sunday school, but just learned about families. As they came to the church and were saying to me as a youth group leader, what do we do with this? Describing the same kind of things that you're describing, and learn that is real, and learn to care about it.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I would have went a different direction, but this was presented to me over and over again. All these things that families were struggling with, just in this little local church.
Yeah.
And it changed my life.
Yeah, and I worked with some hoods, we called them back then, and that was really intimidating to me because I was thinking, oh my gosh, some of these kids aren't that much older than I am, or I'm not that much older than they are. And even in the 60s too, you had the radical feminists. Now there were a lot of things that needed to be changed regarding women in terms of their equal pay, equal opportunity, things like that. Some of the laws, rape laws and so forth. But some of the radical feminists embraced abortion and easy divorce, and said, like Betty Friedan's book, the Feminine Mystique, that being a homemaker is like being in a Nazi concentration camp. Yeah. Well, that image of motherhood was really cheapened by some of those, and probably that evolved out of some hurt in their own lives. But that was not a good model for a lot of women, young women. So we had the anti-heroes that were a real distorted image of manhood for the men, and you had some damage done to the women. So you have all this cultural upheaval that affected young people and affected families through divorce and so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when you talk about feminism, I'm not sure, it's a very like traditional thing to be able to identify what feminism is. It's so ingrained
Yes,
into the
right.
culture now, and it's so supported, I think, even by conservative Christians, people who would be, very progressive, I think have become acculturated, with that viewpoint. So maybe that's an episode all of its own. What does feminism mean to us now? But definitely change the family as things. I like to lift up being a pastor because I don't think it's valued in the culture, but being a mother or being a father is completely devalued.
Yeah, it's such a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all these things, begin to matter, and we're talking, we're gonna talk about these principles, but how does this work? Tell me a little bit more about your family, how that worked out for you over time, because now you've gone the whole way through that. As a semi-retired person in our culture, tell me more how that works out in the modern world for you.
Okay, well, I got married. I married one of our volunteer youth leaders, okay? I had 3 little kids. I had been married for over 10 years, about 12 years. And I thought I was very happy. I was living the dream. And one day, my wife told me she wanted a divorce.
How long have you been married?
12 years.
12 years. Okay.
I was absolutely devastated. We weren't fighting, weren't arguing.
In your mind, everything was okay.
I thought everything was great. And I wasn't a workaholic. In fact, my favorite time of the day was I couldn't wait to get home and read my kids a bedtime story and tuck them into bed. My kids were aged 5, 7, and 9. 2 girls and a boy, and I was just destroyed, and nothing I could do to stop it. I did everything in the world I could do to stop it.
And your wife is in the church, of course. You met her in ministry.
Yeah, I met her in ministry, and being a pastor made it all the more difficult, and so we were separated for a while, and she had filed for divorce, and it finally, I tried to keep it from happening for over a year and a half, and finally there was nothing I could do, and it went through. And I was really devastated by it.
Wow.
And but I was single for joint custody with my children, and I saw them almost every day, did everything with them. They still went to church with me every Sunday. We were in my youth group, but boy, it was a dark time.